All right. Hey, everyone. Happy Sunday. Welcome to the session. Thanks for coming in. Let me just turn on the Facebook stream here and make sure it's running. I think it should be running. Okay. All right. Let's just say it's running. Okay. Thank you for coming in for one more Sacred Space session. We're just going to keep doing these until people don't need them anymore, until I drop. Whichever comes first, and we'll find out. Discovery process. And so I just want to say I really appreciate the support of everyone every week when you send me your notes, you send me your emails, comments on the Facebook Live. I read all of these comments, the questions you post, even if I can't get to all of them. I'm reading and intaking everything. The poems you've been sending, thank you so much. All of this is this positive feedback is just, I'll just be very honest, it's very nurturing, nourishing, and helpful for me to know that you're out there, that and even to the specifics, the sessions are too long, not long enough. Could you cover different topics? All of that helps tremendously, because I'm just, the nature of the need, or need is not really the right word, but the thing I'm trying to provide, the nourishment I'm trying to give, is very hard to put into words. And it is often from your words coming back to me to articulate, what the heck this thing even is, right? What is this guy even doing? I keep showing up week after week, and it's like, it's a couple of hours. So it's not like, your time is not valuable either, right? So it's free, but we're all spending time together. So there must be a reason. And, when you email me with, your thanks and your gratitude, which I appreciate, but then your own articulation in your own words of like, why this is helpful right now. I have a sense for that, but it's more, just wild ass intuitive for me. I'm kind of doing this because I'm following my muse. So when you echo that back with your like very eloquent articulation, it helps me a lot in whatever form you do that, like a poem you send or anything. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. So I want to say, we'll get started here. And I want to thank everyone for joining me in the session. I'm honored to be with you in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, and I look forward to sharing time with you in our sacred space together today. And before we open, I'll just give a little, sort of recap of the structure. We'll set sacred space, and today we're going to talk about, an overall topic. And today the topic will be a topic that just hit me a couple of days ago, that it was just time to talk about this topic. And the topic will be the topic, for lack of a better term, the subject of honoring the dead, and how we do that, and why it's important. We'll have two poems after that, and we will. I'll try to get to some Q&A, but I frankly have not spoken on this topic before. I've never had reason to. And certainly this context is unprecedented. So we'll see how that goes. I want to make sure we do that properly. And then we'll try to get Q&A. And then if we only get to a couple of questions, because there are questions from last week too, or we just ran out of time entirely, I think what we'll do is next week we'll do an exclusive Q&A only session, just to sort of work through all the questions that have come up. And then we'll have a little exercise for the next week to suggest as well, and then we'll close. Okay. So let's get started, and I will set our sacred space here. This is a space that we would like to hold as being devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order so that we can safely and with security open within ourselves to higher guidance. However we take that, not higher guidance from each other or from me, right? But just creating the sacred space amongst ourselves so that we can within ourselves open to higher guidance and take that guidance. And then even after we get it, we can take it or leave it. We can refuse the guidance, but it's just, a touchstone to go get back and get recalibrated, check the compass again, check the navigational map of our feeling, of our intuition and inspiration. So we want to make this we would like to make this a safe sanctuary space for all of us to relax and surrender with no danger or threat. Okay. So that we can partake of the emotional nourishment, the spiritual nourishment that you can only really get from being in sacred space, and then in this case, being together in sacred space in a group. In an opening sacred space today, I will propose the usual following 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. Number 1 is confidentiality. Now, this is the internet, and the video can get out, so the way we do confidentiality is via anonymization. So when you post a question, if you're posting it as you, that's fine. But if you don't want to be known as you, you just go into the edit, my profile, change your name to Mickey Mouse or whatever, and then post your question. Okay. So the security of confidentiality. Number 2, the protection and sanctuary of the principle of this is a space of no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. We are holding space for each other to be afraid, to be anxious, to be at our wits' end, to be happy, even though we feel guilty about being happy, to be relaxed, even though we're like, should I even be relaxed? The should is taken away, and we are creating this space from our own collective sovereign power. Right? This is not a space that I'm giving to you. This is a space that we are all creating as equals, where we can then each take in common of the protection. Right? So we hold space for each other. No recommendations, no here's a book you should read, none of that. If I'm like grappling with a problem, then our posture really is to sit and be with you, be a witness. And if you're uncomfortable, you can just turn your back on the person and form a protective perimeter around them. So even if you can't take what I'm saying, right, and it's making you uncomfortable, then you can just protect me, right? You just don't say anything. And when I see you, and I see you with your back to me, but like sword out, shield ready, right below your eye level to protect me, then that also nourishes me. You don't even have to say anything, right? I know you're all there, and we all have each other's backs, so that I can express whatever comes out of me, and that's it. That's the nourishment. So that's number 2. Number 3, a corollary, no commerce. Nothing is sold or recommended or pitched or suggested. We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. For what you are is what we're here for. We're here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. We're here for you and the power that you are, not for the goal that you may be a means to. Okay. And the 4th is, no expectation of participation. There's no pressure to do anything. Again, the nourishment comes from the held space of your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do provide. And you don't have to ask a question. You don't have to chat. You can turn it on and just be like doing your laundry, paying half attention, bail halfway through. It doesn't matter. It's okay. You do whatever you need to do. This is your safe space. And then the beauty of all of us doing this together is that together, all of us doing it in real time, and then even via the replay, right, which is something we've experienced and observed, it amplifies that safe, sacred space. So this is what I would propose that we all do. And if you're all not, if any one of you is not okay with that, that's okay. We will pause now to give you a moment to withdraw from the group. And then we'll just catch up with you later in profane space. We'll have a latte, we'll hang out, no worries at all. We don't have to do everything together. But now we're going to move into sacred space. And if you don't want to do that, then you can kind of take your step back now. And we'll see you later. Okay. All right. So with the rest of us, we will now move forward together into sacred space. Confidentiality, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, no tough love, no expectation of participation. All right, here we are. Thank you for being here. So, with the tsunami of the pandemic, fanning out across the planet, we've already sort of suffered tremendous casualty, sickness, suffering, loss of life. I think the last report was that something on the order of 160,000 people have died as a result of the coronavirus. And all the things. They think it's an undercount because of all the sort of other cases, but there's been a tremendous loss of life, and that's the first wave of the tsunami. And the second wave is obviously the economic sort of tsunami of the shutdown. And so I think that the storm is not done, but I got the very strong signal that it was time in our sacred space sessions together, the arc of the conversations we've been having, to talk about the topic of the honoring of the dead. Okay, the honoring of the dead. And how that actually connects into many things we've been talking about, not the least of which is the topic of the golden thread, this motif, this symbol of the golden thread, that I know you all love, right? But the golden thread will relate directly to the topic of the glorious, in my mind, and lovely and wonderful and life-affirming topic of honoring the dead, okay? And whether you've been touched by loss of life with a direct loved one, an acquaintance, someone you heard about, a friend of a friend, people in the community, or even just no one in your immediate circle, but just feeling the overall grief of the loss all around you, on the planet. This is something that I would like to share with you so that you are armed and equipped with these ideas as we move forward through the storm together. Okay. So in past sessions, we've talked about, a lot of related topics like fear of death from the coronavirus. Like, what do I do? It could be nothing. It could be, I could be dead in 5 days. How do I think about that? So we talked about topics like that. And we've talked about the power of grief and grieving, how grief is just not just a valid part of human life and experience, but also how grief, full on, properly kind of absorbed and expressed grief is actually critical to the process of healing, to the critical process of anything really in life. And the ideal is to not run away from it, not stuff it down. You're just going to make the process take longer and be more painful. But if that's the way you need to do it, that's the way you need to do it. But the ideal, if you can do it, is to embrace grief and to sit with it. And we've talked about the difference between grief and depression in that context. And how in many ways the pain of grief is actually the fastest and most painful, but the fastest straight line path through the tunnel to the other side after loss. but that's not why we do it. We don't do it because it's the straightest line path. We do it because we are fully surrendering to the pain. And then, the ballast tanks blow faster than any other method, but that's not why we do it. And today I want to talk a little bit more specifically about grief and grieving, but specifically grieving the dead, and then specifically honoring the dead, honoring the dead. And I will connect that with a golden thread that we've talked about in past sessions. If you don't know what I'm talking about, because these are long sessions and some of you are new, I'm just going to, in the chat, I'm just going to post the little sort of clip video we did of in the first session, I think, when I was reading the William Stafford poem about the golden thread. So the poet Bill Stafford, talked about this thread as this thread you get every morning, and your job, right, essentially, as a poet, but as any human, sort of, finding your way in life, your path, your like true meaning and purpose in life. Your job is to follow that golden thread for as long as you can before you break it. And of course, it shows up first thing in the morning because the golden thread is a phenomenon of the sacred. Right? That's why you go into the sacred. That's why you sacrifice your goat, so that you can have access to that golden thread of yours. So that when you come back out in the marketplace, you're reminded of why I'm even here on the earth in the first place. And then you like take out your sword and shield and like get to work, right? But in Stafford's sort of description of it, which I agree with, right? You need to follow it gently. It breaks very in and among us as a people connected to each other. And many of you then afterward flooded back feedback that this image of the golden thread has been powerful for you. Even reading the poem 2 or 3 sessions ago together put you in tears, put me in tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, recognition and joy and inspiration. And I totally feel that. I totally feel that. And so now I want to connect the feeling of this golden thread to the activity and life function, the proper, powerful life function of honoring and grieving the dead. Now, the dead are all around us. And that's not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing. Anytime you go to a city hall or a sort of, a courthouse, right, where trials are held and the judges are, and you look at any of those Doric columns on the facade, right, you are looking at the remains of the dead of Greek and Roman civilization. And that is a good thing. Right? I mean, democracy itself is a reflection of the work of ancestors of ours who are now dead. And we live and thrive and are nurtured and nourished in the democracies that they founded. Anything, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Eiffel Tower, the Great Wall of China, all are reflections and the fruits of the dead. Your hair color, your eye color, the shape of your nose, the shape of your body, all reflections of the dead, of your ancestors, right, who are by definition dead. Not just biologically, but intellectually, spiritually, mythopoetically. The figures of history who have influenced you in poetry and intellect and art and inspiration, all are of the dead. Every time you listen to Mozart or Jimi Hendrix or Elvis or John Lennon, you are communing with the dead. The dead are all around us, and this is not a morbid nor a bad thing. This is part of what makes life beautiful. It's only when we misunderstand this phenomenon that we run into trouble. We say, because we live in this profane world where we're like, we have no direction, we've lost connection with the sacred. So what's the closest thing we can grasp for? The closest thing is we want good things. So we want positivity. We want everything to be positive and upward and new and young and fresh and not dead and not old, right? Because we've lost connection with the golden thread. So the closest plastic counterpart, substitute, is in the profane. We see good and bad, so we're like, well, let's just pick good. And brute forced fear, threat, and control go after good. Everything has to be love and light. Everything has to be never dark and never sad and never angry or never hopeless. Economically, everything always has to be gain and never loss. And I mean, this is just not true, right? Or real. That's not our real life experience. Things are light and dark. Things are painful and pleasurable. There is gain and loss. But without the overall compass of the big picture, we are immersed in the profane and we just desperately grasp at anything that looks bright. But going just after the positive is like going for fool's gold. It's not the real gold. The real gold is the whole thing, right? Light and dark together. And so when we do this in this lopsided way, it leads to all kinds of difficulty. Not as punishment because you're a bad person, finger wagging, right? But just because that's not how the physics of reality actually work, right? And so in reality then, the dead are all around us and they nourish us. The dead built our world. And when we stand tall, we are standing on the shoulders of the dead with their love and approval. Right? And that is okay. That is fully okay. That is the reality. But then when we are uncomfortable with the dead and only want light and positivity, that's when funny and weird things start to happen. It's only when we run away from the dead and like, go away, I've forgotten, you're dead, that's it, no body, no person, that's what I believe, it's scientific. So that's it. When you come to me in my dreams, when I think about you, I need to let you go and like push you away. They're like, that's when they start to chase us, right? Because they're like, where are you going? I am your ancestor, right? We have stuff to do. We have things to build further. My work is not done. Your work is definitely not done. And, let's go. We got to roll. And were you come back? So they're chasing you not to hurt you, but to basically continue to engage with you. And because of all these funny things of how our culture has worked out, we have come to the point where we are all trained. It's drilled into us with fear, control, and threat. Horror movies, right? To studiously ignore the dead that are like right there, right? And then if they come a little closer and really want to talk to us and engage with us, we end up nuking them with pills and denial and distraction and constant busyness, immersing ourselves even more deeply in the profane. We fear meditation because of what comes to us when we meditate. We fear going to sleep without chemical assistance because we fear what comes to us if we go into sleep unguarded. And so we tighten our grip of control more and more, right? And we get even further and further from the realm of the sacred, because the more we tighten, the more easily the golden thread snaps. When we are in the sacred is often when the dead come back to us, because we have relaxed and we're open to guidance and message. In our dreams, during prayer, during meditation, during moments of quiet reflection, we're just sitting in the car. And they come to us in various forms and they say, hey, what's up? So can we talk now? Right? Here's what I think about your relationship. I think, you gotta, and you're like, no, shut up, go away. Right? But when we finally let them in and we do talk to them, we let them flow with us and engage with us. That's when we allow ourselves to finally collapse into grief and tears and messiness and total disintegration. That's what everyone fears, total disintegration. But that's when you disintegrate is what happens when you're in the cocoon. And that is transformation, right? I'm not saying don't fear it. It is scary. It's scary as heck. But I'm also saying it's natural. It's normal, right? I mean, the pain of childbirth doesn't stop you, right, from having your child, and it's worth it, right? No matter what happens, it's worth it. And so over time, what I've observed in my work is that when you realize this whole phenomenon that I'm describing, and then you're like, oh, I get it now. All these things from childhood, I get it now. And you gradually turn around, accept it, and embrace it. You're not afraid to go back all the time to consult the dead. I mean, not in like seances or mediumship, but just like letting your dreams come to you, letting your flashes of like intuition, hairs on the back of your neck, letting that come to you. And then talking back to it, asking questions, saying, well, what do you think about this? What, if we do what you're saying, that doesn't make sense. What about this, this, and this? And they will come back to you and they will be like, first of all, glad we're talking. And second of all, so here's what I think. Here's what I think. Right. And it's very unscientific. And it's unscientific not because it's not true. It's unscientific because it is not predictable and controllable. Because the dead are your counterparty, right? They don't do stupid pet tricks. They come as they come. And so the metaphor is like sacred space, right? You're not afraid of sacred space anymore. And with the dead, it's like to go find them and talk to them, you go into the basement, you go down into the dark basement of your metaphorical house. And when you accept this phenomenon, you're not afraid of your own basement anymore. It's your basement, right? And everything down there, all the things that come up to greet you and ask you for like your opinion and tell you their opinion, everything down there, even the seemingly scary things, belong to you too, because it's your house, right? And everybody now, you are the member of your line of progeny that is on the earth carrying the ball down the field, right? You're the only one with a body, right? And all the ancestors before you, they live in your house and they can like do all the armchair quarterbacking they want, right? But you are the CEO on the ground in this generation. So you get to call the shots and you get to call on them to help you. And the beauty is they're your ancestors. So when you ask them to put a thumb on the scales of life unfairly in your favor, they'll do that because you're all on the same team. But it's not objective, it's partisan. Right? You're all on the same team trying to sort of propel forward the golden thread in aggregate and manifold that has been sort of assigned or granted or blessed or gifted to you and your line. That's one of many ways to think about it, but that's one of the main ways that I like to think about it. And so because of that, not just as a family or a clan, but also as a nation and as a race of humanity, right? The human race. Seen from the perspective of the sacred, it is profoundly important that we properly grieve and honor our dead. Especially now in this current time of the storm, right? When as a society we are being plunged into transformation. And one aspect of our collective transformation is to come back face to face with death and with the dead of our near loved ones as well, right? Because there are so many newly dead, people we have actually known and loved even a few weeks ago, and now they are dead. And this then forces you, plunges you into transformation, right? Pressure and containment, to at least consider how you continue to place them or not place them in your life going forward. Do you really follow the purely scientific, mechanistic, Cartesian, blindly scientific view and say, well, they don't exist anymore. The body's dead, so they're dead. It's gone. Soul, spirit, I don't really subscribe to that new age, sort of hoo-ha. And that's it. So it's either religious, and I have to buy that entirely, or it's scientific. There's nothing in between, right? There's nothing in between. So I'm not religious, so I guess I must be scientific. It must be either, right, sort of 1 or 0, nothing in between. And so, as a result of that, you follow the template recipe book, and then you proceed to forcibly, with fear, control, and threat, stuff down all your real feeling and all your real grief. At the wake, at the funeral, assuming you even get to have one right now, right? When you start crying a little, that's okay. When you start breaking down and you're like on all fours on the ground, they say, shh, stop that. And it's like, why is that? Why is that? Why do you stop that? Right? Why would you stop me or anyone from fully exploding with rage and grief at the passing and loss of my kinsman or kinswoman? The only reason to do that is fear and ignorance of the larger sort of picture. And when you are steeped 99% in the profane, what you have is fear and ignorance. So, do you ignore them now that they're dead? Do you stop thinking about them? You just distract yourself and move on? Or do you fully grieve with them and sit with them? Sit with the loss and fully embrace the mythopoetic reality of who they were and who they still are. Do you invite them to continue with you as your companion in your journey of life? When you lose someone, the shape of the hole that has been ripped in your soul, in your life, is in their shape. And when you ignore the pain of their loss, you ignore this, hole that's shaped in their shape. You are ignoring them. The whole of their loss in your life is them in their dead form. And dead or alive, even in their dead form, they still love you and they still need you, just as you still need them. Now, look, I don't want to turn this into an intellectual discussion of the supernatural or afterlife or whatever. To me, that's just a stupid way, especially now when the dead are piling up every day all around us and they need us, right? And if you don't feel that, then sit in sacred space and see what you do feel. Okay. And so I was trying to think of how to explain all this in the most practical, non-New Age, non-spiritual, secular way. Devoid of both religion and devoid of science, both of which, right, miss huge swaths of actual lived human experience. Right? There's an entire 3 or 4 football fields in between the extremes of science and religion where neither of them address them, right? And frankly, you go into the sacred and all of this is covered. Even sort of in a supra-religious manner, supra-scientific manner. And I was basically struggling over the last 2 days about how to sort of describe this. And what I came up with is that in the sacred, in the mythopoetic, so not religious, not scientific, but mythopoetic, I will try to explain why the dead are real and why the dead need us. And to do that, I'm going to use the mythopoetic image of the golden thread. Okay. So don't take this as scientific. Take this as metaphorical. Let's just call it that. Metaphorical. Okay. And don't take this as a proof. Take this as an attempt to put into words the feelings that we already have, so that we have vocabulary to express them and then to engage them and then to question them and work with them further in the realm of the sacred, right? Where there's no sort of cocktail hour relative going, well, you don't really believe that, do you? You're like a Baptist. You've been a Baptist your whole life, or you're Catholic. You'll be like, okay, we're in the temple now. All of that fear, threat, and control is on the outside. Okay. And at any point where this is not nourishing, you're not comfortable, you can step out as well. There's nothing forcing you here. I'm not, you better stay here or else you're not going to get the point. It's like, no, you come and go as you please. Absolutely. And this is uncomfortable for me too. It's like, I'm being called to talk about this. So I'm just like, I'm doing this basically get the muse off my back. So here we go. So the image of the golden thread. This thread, this gossamer golden thread that comes to you only in certain points of the day. when you have eyes to see, and when you have ears to hear, and when your heart is open to feel. This is the thread that leads you on your life path. This is, for those of you who study bliss with me, your ziran. I talked about this concept a couple of sessions ago. The natural flow of your life, pre-existing pattern and natural flow of your life, even before you were born. And which is the key, this golden thread, the key to uncovering and discovering your true meaning and purpose in your life, why you're here on the planet. And that's why we burst into tears when we really talk about the golden thread in this lyrically poetic and mythopoetic way. So that's great. Fine, great. Okay, we know that already. Okay. So my question then, to try to sort of step into this a little, is, does the golden thread die? And the answer, from a visceral firsthand feeling of it, and those of you who are in touch with your golden threads, you back me up on this. The answer is obviously no. The golden thread doesn't die, it is eternal. I mean, this is patently self-evident. If you have had any direct experience with the golden thread, and I know from your emails, many of you have, the majority of you have, then I don't need to explain this any further. Obviously, the golden thread doesn't die. And we can get a little metaphysical if you want. And this is the stuff that Zen koans are made of, right? Even after the universe itself ends, and the Big Bang reverses and collapses in on itself, and even elements, carbon, hydrogen, gold itself, the element of gold itself, physical gold, ceases to exist. Of course, the golden thread will still be there, continuing to guide the expansion and contraction of reality itself, just like it guided the pumping of your lungs when you were still alive. Okay. And Zenists, when they talk koans and they try to get you actually to see the golden threadness of everything, they'll say things like, at the end of the kalpa, when everything is destroyed, one thing will still remain. What is it? And the master replies, it's windy again this morning. And that's a fabulous answer, right? Touches the jugular of the golden thread right there. And so, for those of you who have studied bliss with me, the golden thread is also your ziran. Basically the same thing. And the more you are in the flow of your golden thread, the more da qi, or big qi, right? The golden thread is the flow of your qi, if you will. And when you are in it and you rev it up and you flow with it, it becomes more than a thread. It becomes more like this sort of rushing river, and you become super big qi, da qi, as we use that term. So the golden thread never dies. And so the next question is, if the golden thread never dies and it's guiding me through my path of life, does my connection / relationship to the golden thread ever die? And the answer is, once again, of course not. Of course your connection to the golden thread never dies. Do you really think you get off the hook so easily? Right? It's like, my kids, when this thing hit, they're like, oh, it's the pandemic, so we don't have school anymore. We have no more homework, right? It's like, psych, not so fast, right? You still have online classes and take-home projects. You still have to do your homework. And they're like, no. And so when you feel your ziran, you realize it is very, very old. It is as fresh as a new bud in springtime, exploding out of the dead branch of winter, and yet the thread itself is very, very old. Like when you walk into a very ancient sacred site like Ireland, or Chartres Cathedral, right about an hour outside of Paris, down in the crypts of Chartres, you just get this feeling like this place has been here for centuries, or in Newgrange's case, millennia. Okay. And that's just the energy, this feeling of your ziran as being very, very old. So your ziran, your golden thread, predated you, and even in a sense found you and selected you, custom commissioned you for it to flow through in this world. And the more you discover this fact, the more you discover your own core deep self in a way. Just like when I used that image of Jonah and the whale, and there was a podcast I did about a month or two ago where I talked all about the motif of Jonah and the whale, and you can listen to this later. It's free. It's a podcast of a friend of mine, where I give the full Jonah and the whale story. But basically, Jonah went down and transformed into a prophet. He resisted his prophethood. The whale came up, grabbed him, took him down into the belly of the beast for 3 days and 3 nights. And then when he finally surrendered, the belly came up and spat him up onto the shore. Now, when he came up, the difference was, instead of being, a householder and a merchant and all these other things, and I don't have time to go off with Obi-Wan Kenobi on his crazy adventure, and I don't have time to do any of that. I have practical stuff in the profane to do. When you're brought down into the belly of the beast, the transformation that happens is, no, I realize now I am a prophet first, and everything else is secondary. And your entire world sort of flips on its head. You can Google that term and you'll get Wikipedia. Your entire world flips on its head. Well, like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. Right? I'm just a farmer. I work for my uncle. It's no big deal. And then after the transformation, you're like, no, I am a Jedi, and I'm a Jedi first, and everything else follows after that. So when you undergo this kind of transformation, what happens is not actually that you change from one form to a new form. Right? You follow? What's actually happening is that you are excavating and uncovering your deeper, actually more true form. When you get into the golden thread and you get into the bliss of what you're actually meant to do on this planet, you don't transform from a regular schmo into this luminous person following your bliss. It's like, no, you uncover the fact that you are this luminous person following your bliss. You just didn't realize that you were asleep. Right? So the schmo version of you was the fake, less real version of you. Right? And the journey is a journey back to your true core self. Right? In the Jonah example, Jonah was selected by God to be his prophet. And do we imagine this only happened in his 33rd year of life? Of course not. God selected Jonah before he was even born. God even arranged for his birthing and his parenting and all of that stuff. All of his early childhood experiences, because he was shaping himself a little sort of prophet to do what he wanted in the world. And when Jonah transformed from regular schmo into prophet, what he was actually doing was reverting back to his original blueprint. He was rediscovering or discovering, right, the original Zuran of his life path. Okay. Put another way, the butterfly in the caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly sort of triptych. The butterfly is not this new creation. It was always deep in the intrinsic code of the caterpillar. A caterpillar is already a butterfly. It just has not gotten there. It has not manifested or discovered it yet. And the Zuran, the natural pattern, the golden thread of caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly is very, very old. Right? Every spring it seems brand new, but the pattern itself is ancient, even more ancient than any human temple. So, with that, the last part of the argument I'll give is that, so then if the golden thread never dies, and your connection to the golden thread never dies, and this is a visceral feeling thing, a knowing, a first-hand knowing, for all who are, especially for all who are in touch with their golden thread and Zuran already, artists, healers, poets, warriors, anyone who touches this core part of themselves knows this. It is patently self-evident at this feeling, intuitive knowing. You don't have to believe, you just know. And so then if the golden thread never dies, and your connection to the golden thread never dies, because you don't get it off so easily. And so what this implies is that obviously this means that you don't ever die either. right? If the golden thread never dies and your connection to the golden thread never dies, then you don't ever die either. And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. But of course, your body, my body dies. I'm looking at my, sort of, great grandparent, and they were here and now they're not, right? So it's like, yes, of course, your body dies. But then if your connection and obligation to the golden thread never dies, what does that mean? Right? Irregardless of what future form you take, obviously, it means that you are the golden thread. You are the golden thread. Right? When you are offered the golden thread every morning when you get up, and if you're like Bill Stafford, you're like, I got to drop everything before I do anything else. I have to write a poem now, not after my coffee, not after I open my bills. Now, the golden thread is now. We eat when served. Right? Write my poem, morning poems. Robert Bly, morning poems. Right? Did a whole sort of book of morning poems after, in honor of his mentor, Bill Stafford. After Stafford died in '93, Robert honored him as his ancestor by taking up his own practice of doing morning poems. And he wrote a poem every morning. So when you are offered the golden thread every morning, you are offered a connection, a gossamer thread to the deepest, most eternal part of your own inner self. Call it whatever you want to call it. Right? Call it your soul, your connection to the muse, the divine. Call it whatever you want to call it. But when you touched it, is the place where poetry comes from, where genius comes from, where flashes of given truth come from. Right? The revelations of Picasso, of Van Gogh, Newtonian revelation, Einsteinian revelation. All these things come from this golden thread. And this is also where you come from too. This golden thread is what you are. And if you have felt it, then you have felt your own deepest core. And that is why you cry when I point your attention back to it. I'm not making you cry, right? It's your own realization that is what is making you cry. Tears of relief and joy and recognition. Right? Come in out of the cold of the profane, into the sanctuary of the sacred, where you can take your masks off, forget about the roles you're playing, the game of pretend you're playing out there, which is not invalid. I never invalidate the profane. But every now and then, and for some of us, we like more than not to be in the realm of the sacred, because we like our golden thread self. We like being in the mode of the golden thread. And I'd like to read the Stafford poem again, if you would indulge me. This is the first one where he talks about the thread itself, not the second one where he talks about the thread between us as people. This is the way it is, and I'll just read it again. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change through passing time. But it doesn't change. It is eternal and unchangeable. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it is hard for others to see because they are in the world of the profane. While you hold it, you can't get lost. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Right? It is your compass. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. Now, the first reading of this we did a few sessions ago, this last line, you don't ever let go of the thread. People read it, and myself, I read it as advice from Bill Stafford. All this stuff is happening. Don't worry, just hang on to the thread and you'll be okay. Right? So that's great advice. Don't ever let go of the thread. But if you read that line now in light of everything we've talked about, you don't ever let go of the thread. Doesn't have to be read as advice. It can also be read as simply an observation of an actual fact, an observed fact, which is you don't actually ever let go of the thread. In other words, even if you wanted to let go of it, you couldn't let go of it. You don't ever let go of the thread. And the reason you don't actually ever let go of the thread is because you are the thread. You are the thread. And it is very hard and subtle to see this. I mean, as we said, that question from a couple sessions ago, where it's like, who am I behind all the masks? When all the masks are down, who am I? And we talked about how hard it was to talk about that ultimate sort of core of yourself because of the Shankara, the Avishankara quote from the 8th century, his commentary on the Kena Upanishad, right? Where it's like, the one who knows is never itself the object of knowing, just as fire doesn't burn itself or fire doesn't illumine itself. And so the golden thread, the one that knows, it's very hard for it to see itself. You feel it, but you can't ever see it, right? You feel it flowing through, you see it in the actions that are emanating from your hands. But it's hard to see it. And of course, from Shankara, we learn so many sort of these points of physics. You don't ever let go of the thread because you are the thread. And so all of this is not meant to be, a scientific proof of afterlife or anything like that. And the reason I don't care for proof is because the point for me in the sacred, not in the profane, but in the sacred, the point in the sacred is not to capture or control it in an intellectual, scientific, or religious, profane kind of way. So we can control it, we can predict it, we can tell you if you do A, then B will happen, so that we humans are the lords of this process. No. Shackling it with the plastic shackles of like data and proof and predictability. Right? All of that is in the realm of the profane. In sacred space, we don't control, we surrender, and we are simply marveling with our mouths agape, right? At how things feel in our bodies and in our hearts. That's what we do in the sacred. And from that, you start to know things. And the knowing is at a very different level. It's not religious, it's not faith. You don't need to believe. And it's not scientific. I don't need data to prove it. Right? It's somewhere in between, where it's even more than I feel it. It's like from a mythopoetic pattern match at this very deep level of visceral intuition, it's just, it's intrinsically, intuitively obvious, right? Once you have experienced it. When I read the poem and describe the golden thread and describe Ziran, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not unveiling something new and like, ta-da, look at this brand new sort of, hair tonic or whatever, right? I'm just giving you words to describe something you already know and feel, but perhaps did not have quite the precise vocabulary to talk about it before. I'm simply pointing to something you've always already had and which you always will have, because it is what you are at core. And so when we die, the golden thread continues. We continue. The most important core part of us continues. And we know this because we feel it. You don't have to believe or have faith. You just know. You know in your body. You know in your spirit. It's almost like saying, I've been reading all this stuff from Newton, and he talks about this thing called gravity. And do you really believe in this thing called gravity? I don't really know what he's talking about. And you're just like, what? Right? Wake up. Wake up. So I'm not a big fan of scientific proof or religious belief, right, at gunpoint. Not because I think those are sort of bad, but just because there's something better. There's something even better that you can have. So then, for those of us who have died and have passed on, and who are now shades all around us, the continuing golden threads all around us. And in the past few months, all 160,000 of them passed on from coronavirus. They have not just, in the scientific Cartesian sort of point of view of the world, just died and disappeared, proof they're gone from existence. So just forget about it and move on. Of course not. Of course not. They are here with us. They have actually, if we're going to talk about it, they themselves have just gone through a humongous transformation. They have gone through a humongous transformation, have they not? And they are our loved ones and fellow citizens and countrymen and countrywomen. And they need right now, at the very least, to not be ignored. To not be ignored. And I mean, it's not a high bar, right? I'm not even asking for a lot. Just to not ignore them out of fear, threat, and control, right? And pretend, even though we know in our hearts it's not true, pretend that proof they just disappeared. Well, what does that mean for you? Do you not have a golden thread? Will you not continue with your golden thread after you're dead? Obviously not. Obviously not. And they are all a reflection of us. These are our loved ones. These are our fellow sort of humans on the earth. And so with this then, I would like to propose that here in our sacred space together, we take a first step in giving the dead honor and recognition and acknowledgement, and even our blessing that they have passed through this transformation. Their golden threads are continuing, and we bless them, right, on their journey. We see them, we feel them all around us in photographs and the rooms that have still not been unpacked or packed up, in memories and feelings, in turns of phrase that we still use that we got from them. Right? These are all sort of just, you can say they're just memories and little snippets, but they are all reflections of the golden thread that passed through. And that golden thread, as we just explained, is eternal and continuing. And the golden thread is not something theoretical. We've felt it. We feel it now, especially in the sacred. So to the newly dead, I would like to have us honor them. Well, we honor their golden threads, which they are, and which obviously continue on into the unending flow of life, continuing transformation. And we hold sacred space for them, all of us together as a group. And we support them with what we get out of sacred space too. We support them with the emotional support and nourishment, and the spiritual support and nourishment through their next transformations, whatever they may be. Right? And depending on the sort of spiritual system you subscribe to, there will be all kinds of different stories of this level and that level and after. I'm not worried about any of that. I'm not looking for proof, predictability, or control. All I know is this carrier, this reflection, this manifestation of a golden thread that I loved and I still love, has just undergone a huge transformation. I don't need the details of what's going on afterwards, but I do know she needs me. And she needs my love and blessing and remembrance and honor and power. And in sacred space, I open up the satellite dish and I push all of that to her or him. Because just because they're dead doesn't mean I love them any less. And we do this for them in exactly the way that we here, as the living, support each other in sacred space through our transformations through life. We, the living, hold space and support the newly dead in their next transformations, in whatever form those transformations may be. And in holding sacred space for them, we are holding a space devoid of fear, control, and threat. Whatever they need to do next, because we don't even know. Like, it's like there's a veil there, so we don't know. We just hold space for them to do it, to be happy, sad, lost, angry, relieved, joyous, liberated. Anything is okay. Whatever they need to do is okay. And we hold sacred space for them with love, nurturing, blessing, and surrender. We still miss the dead, and we grieve their loss from our company. We don't shy away from the grieving. We grieve their loss from our company. We grieve the loss of their companionship. But we also clap for them, right? We give them blessing and honor and power to send them forward into their own next phase of transformation along the flow of their own golden threads. And so I would like to ask in this sacred space, only if you want, I would like to ask in this sacred space that we're holding together now that we have a moment of silence, even within the sacred space, sacred within the sacred, for us to do this, to give them our blessing and our love and our acknowledgement and our power, and to give them our open and unsuppressed grief, love, blessing, and power for their journey ahead. Thank you. Thank you. And so now, as we continue to travel together in the storm, and as we continue to possibly lose loved ones to the land of the dead, I hope that what I've just explained about the golden thread and its continuousness before and after our periods of being alive will be of some support and comfort and insight for you. Not just for your own life, but also for what your own loved ones who have passed may be needing from you in this, their next phase of their journeys. All right. Okay. So thank you for indulging me to talk about that topic. So now as we move through our session, instead of questions, I'll try for questions at the end, but I want to read two poems just to kind of pull forward and continue this act of honoring the dead. And if we completely run out of time for questions, I'll just sort of have the next session be all questions and no special topics to make up for the time. So there's two poems I wanted to read here. The first is by Robert Bly from his Morning Poems book. And the name of this poem is called The Russian. And this poem, it's a beautiful poem, came to me as I was reflecting on this topic of honoring the dead. And the way this poem came to be was that I think in the 80s, the mid or late 80s, Robert Bly was in Canada at some conference, and there was this 30-something Canadian man there who was actually of Russian descent. And at one of the breaks or over a beer, he told Robert this story about his father, his Russian father, back in Russia, who was a soldier in World War II. And Robert was very moved and just blown away by the story. And in the morning, for his morning poem, he basically wrote down the story as the poem. And I'm going to read this, and I'll do this the usual way. I'll read it once with a bit of color commentary, to really get all the juice out of it, and then we'll read it through straight with no comments. Robert Bly, the Russian. The Russians had few doctors on the front line. My father's job was this. After the battle was over, he'd walk among the men hit, sit down and ask, "Would you like to die on your own in a few hours, or should I finish it?" Most said, "Don't leave me." The two would have a cigarette. He'd take out his small notebook. We had no dog tags, and write the man's name down, his wife's, his children, his address, and what he wanted to say. And when the cigarette was done, the soldier would turn his head to the side, and his father would presumably shoot him. My father finished off 400 men that way during the war. He never went crazy. They were his people. He came to Toronto. My father in the summers would stand on the lawn with a hose, watering the grass that way. It took a long time. He'd talk to the moon, to the wind. "I can hear you growing," he'd say to the grass. "We come and go. We're no different from each other. We are all part of something. Feel that golden thread? We have a home." When I was 13, I said, "Dad, do you know they've invented sprinklers now?" He went on watering the grass. This is my life. Just shut up if you don't understand it. And that's it. It's classic Robert Bly. Classic Robert Bly. So for me, this is just a stunning poem. Especially that line, he finished off 400 men that way during the war. But he says, they never went crazy. They were his people. And that really zooms out to, it's not me and the morality of what I'm doing. It's like we are all in this flow. And we are caring for each other as one flow, is the feeling I have from that. And he says it later on, we're no different from each other. We're all part of something. We have a home. And that line, they were his people, just has always been stunning to me, just knocked me over. And now reading it, I just think of even all the, the physicians and healthcare workers working in the COVID hospitals and the kind of enormity that they are witnessing at this period of their lives in this section of their own golden threads. For me, this immersion in the death of these men, active participation in the death of these men by their consent and request, turns this into a sacred space. Even on the battlefield, it becomes sacred space. Because it is a space of no fear, control, and threat. He gives them choice. They make the choice. He accommodates them. He prepares their honoring when he takes down all the names of their family and what they want to say. He gives them voice. It's sacred from that standpoint because he walks out onto the battlefield, and in this place of profane sort of death and destruction, of fear, threat, and control, he creates these pockets of sacred space, which are, as we define it, spaces of, when he sits with each soldier, there's a space he is creating for that soldier, a space of love, nurturing, and surrender. And in that space, you feel this golden thread coming through from the men to each other, as Russians, as humans, through to the grass years later in Toronto. And then even through to the son, right, who is uninitiated in all of this. The son doesn't even know it anymore. The son is 13, tellingly, his own blade of grass, a young boy at 13, right at the cusp of initiation. And this interaction about the sprinkler and this father telling him to shut up. And Robert will always put a bit of funny thing to lighten it at the end because he knows this balance of how a story needs to be. But even that has its poignancy because 13, right at the cusp of initiation, this interaction is the beginning of how his father initiates him and continues the golden thread through his countrymen on the battlefield, through him to Toronto, into his son. And we know that the initiation was successful because that son is the 30-something man now telling this very story to us. The golden thread has continued all the way through. It's the son who says he never went crazy and they were his people. It's the son who utters that line, even though the father never said that to the son. Right? That golden thread has been passed on. The fruit, the knowledge, the insight, the wisdom has been carried on. So to me, this is a very poignant poem about, very subtly about initiation as well. The son's own initiation, telling his own remark in 13, and then completing that by telling the story as a grown man. So that the son himself is continuing the golden thread. He intertwines it with Robert's as a poet. Robert continues it. And now, 30, 35 years later, a generation and a half later, in the midst of a global pandemic, this golden thread comes to us and supports us on our journey as well. So I'll read it the second time. The Russians had few doctors on the front line. My father's job was this. After the battle was over, he'd walk among the men hit, sit down, and ask, "Would you like to die on your own in a few hours? Or should I finish it?" Most said, "Don't leave me." The two would have a cigarette. He'd take out his small notebook. We had no dog tags, and write the man's name down, his wife's, his children, his address, and what he wanted to say. When the cigarette was done, the soldier would turn his head to the side. My father finished off 400 men that way during the war. He never went crazy. They were his people. He came to Toronto. My father in the summers would stand on the lawn with a hose, watering the grass that way. It took a long time. He talked to the moon, to the wind. "I can hear you growing," he'd say to the grass. "We come and go. We're no different from each other. We're all part of something. We have a home." When I was 13, I said, "Dad, do you know they've invented sprinklers now?" He went on watering the grass. "This is my life. Just shut up if you don't understand it." So, thank you for being with me for that poem. What I wanted to do was, I didn't want to leave us with that. I wanted to sort of close with a second poem. Similarly, where this idea of a golden thread coming up in different forms, channels, is also felt very deeply for me. I think it's very important when we honor the dead and we grieve them and we bless them, even with poetry, um, it's important when that time is done to gently close the door again and reset that boundary. Yeah. And they can still come and go, but it's just like redrawing the line so that no one gets confused or lost. And so I'll read a second poem now, and then we'll close the poetry section, and then we'll stop. As the second poem will be our way of closing that boundary and restoring it in preparation for our return to the profane. This is a poem by Robinson Jeffers. He was a poet that probably wrote about 100 years ago in California. And this is one of my favorite Jeffers poems. It's a poem called Natural Music. And I'll just read it twice, first with a bit of commentary. Let me just make sure we're all... This is Robinson Jeffers' Natural Music. The old voice of the ocean, the bird chatter of little rivers. So here the voices coming out of different bodies of water, golden thread coming out of different forms. The old voice of the ocean, the bird chatter of little rivers. Winter has given them gold for silver to stain their water, and bladed green for brown to line their banks. It's describing the changing of the seasons as it happens in Northern California. From different throats intone one language, the golden thread of the same voice across different throats. From different throats intone one language. So I believe if we were strong enough to listen without divisions of desire and terror. Now, this idea of listening without the divisions of desire and terror, translated into our language, we would say, if we were strong enough to listen, not in the profane, where fear and desire meaning threat of not getting what you want, fear, threat, and control. If we listen not in the profane, but we listen in the sacred, without desire and terror. Okay. So I believe if we were strong enough to listen, without divisions of desire and terror, to the storm of the sick nations, the rage of the hunger-smitten cities. And I was blown away by this line, especially reading it now 100 years later. It was such a punch in the face for me. The storm of the sick nations, all the nations being ravaged by the first tsunami wave of COVID-19. And then the rage of the hunger-smitten cities, the second tsunami wave of economic devastation that we're going through right now. But if we can hear the storm of these, the storm of the sick nations and the rage of the hunger-smitten cities from the view of the sacred, not just the profane, he goes on to say, those voices also would be found, like the old voice of the ocean, the bird chatter of the little rivers. Those voices would also be found, clean as a child's, or like some girl's breathing, who dances alone by the seashore, dreaming of lovers. So for me, this poem speaks to the idea that the ultimate is to feel the sacred of the golden thread, if you can, even in the ER of a COVID-19 hospital, even in the battlefield of your injured and dying comrades, whom it is your job to finish the job of killing at their request in sacred space. So to feel the sacred of the golden thread, even in the midst of this horror, that is a tall order. And you don't have to do it. But this is the message of the voice of the sacred. The golden thread is with you always and everywhere. If you have eyes to see and if you have a heart to feel, even in the middle of the battlefield, even in sickness and fear, and even after death. The voice of the golden thread is clean as a child's, or like some girl's breathing, who dances alone by the seashore, dreaming of lovers. This is the feeling of the sacred, even in the face of the horrors of the profane. So let me read that once more, and then we'll close. The old voice of the ocean, the bird chatter of little rivers. Winter has given them gold for silver to stain their water, and bladed green for brown to line their banks. From different throats intone one language. So I believe, if we were strong enough to listen, without divisions of desire and terror, to the storm of the sick nations, the rage of the hunger-smitten cities, those voices also would be found, clean as a child's, or like some girl's breathing who dances alone by the seashore, dreaming of lovers. Thank you. All right. So, I didn't know how long all that would take, but that's what I wanted to say, and thank you for being with me and holding space for me and hearing me. We have a bit of time left here, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into some of the questions we've had in the backlog for the last session or two. And let's say we'll do that for about maybe 20, 25 minutes. And then we'll have our suggested exercise for us to try in the coming week. Okay. All right. So let's do some of these questions. Okay. So here's a question: how to continue following my bliss during this time? So hey, Artie, I completed both the 7-day healing program and the bliss program with you in 2017, 3 years ago. After some powerful reflection and soul searching, I identified my bliss and set about making it happen. It took a couple years to plan for, and I finally made the move, literally and figuratively, in 2019. Good job, good job. Recent events surrounding the pandemic have turned my world upside down, and I find myself at a crossroads. In one direction, I'm leaving behind my personal and professional dreams for the sake of my partner and their needs and wants. In the other direction, I'm remaining true to my bliss, but potentially probably navigating my way down this path alone without my partner. How can I create a sacred space for myself now while still in lockdown with my partner to support me in tapping into my intuition to know which path to take and having the courage and strength to pursue it when the pandemic is finally over? I remain open to the possibility of there being more than just a binary choice here. So thank you for this question. I love this. Good job. This is just the kind of question to reflect on in sacred space. I mean, it seems like a practical question. Do I go left or right? Which road do I take? But I mean, it's a larger question of just beyond just practicality or income or, doing the right thing by society's standards. So for me, and you know this, but just to disclaim it up front, I'm heavily biased, right? So for me, bliss is always number one, right? The golden thread is always number one, because it's why you're even here on the earth. And, if you're like Jonah and you push off the golden thread, at some point, some whale is going to come up and pull you down, come up, grab your caterpillar, pull it down into the cocoon, into the belly of the beast, and then spit you out as the butterfly / prophet anyway. Even if not in this life, then perhaps in the next. Right? Sooner or later, the golden thread's going to catch up with you. And I always prefer, getting these things done sooner rather than later. If you have the lens and the tools you have now, I far prefer going down into the belly of the beast now, when I'm fully equipped to sort of handle things, right? I prefer to do that than do it in my next life when I'm 3 years old and I'm going screaming into this trauma or experience that will again transform me. But as surfers say, this is a great set, so let's just surf now and get it done. Now, that having been said, in terms of which road do you take, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, right? So, and I'm not here to tell you what to do or give you tough love or anything. What I will say is that what I've observed in many other situations is that even if you take the non-bliss road, bliss will still find a way, right? Either in compromise with your partner, where you basically draw a line and you're like, why does this choice have to be you choosing him or not? Right? Why can't it be him choosing you or not? Where you say, look, this is what I have to do, and I need you to support me in this as well. I'll support you. We'll come to a halfway point. And if he's like, no, it has to be all me, and you need to give up everything or not, then it's then he's making the choice. It's not just you making the choice. Why are you only the bad guy, right? It's a relationship of two people. Both of you cast a vote, and you both retain your sovereignty. So either compromise, total subversion of the relationship anyway, because your bliss is look, this guy's not helping, so you got to choose, right? Or even worse, in the worst case, you will finish out your life this round not having followed your bliss, right? And there's a veil there that we can't see past, but we fervently hope that you'll have the opportunity to pick it up next round anyway. You will, right? But as this BMW salesman once said to me, which is just so brilliant, I love sharing the story. I'm test driving this BMW. This was years ago, and oh, this is a great car, and then we start joking about, well, even if I don't get into this life, I can always get into the next life. Something. I made some snide remark like that. And without missing a beat, he just turns to me and he's like, yeah, well, that's true, but I got to tell you, even in the next life, it won't be this life. And I was like, just on general principle, I'm going to buy this car from you, because it's how can I say no to that? So even in the next life, it won't be this life. Don't take that as a threat. Take that as an opportunity, a nerdy opportunity, exciting opportunity. I don't drive a BMW, so don't worry. So then what I would do is, just to dip a little bit into the motifs we use in 7-day healing, just quickly to address this, I would do the full board meeting. I would figure out what you gain and need from being with your partner, and how do you get that and still do your bliss anyway, right? Because at the end of the day, even if I were this jerk not jerk, that's not fair. Even on this partner where you have to give up everything because I can't give this thing up. Even if I was like that, it's why would I even want to be with you if you're a person who is actively stuffing down their bliss? I don't even mean you'll be grumpy and unhappy all the time, but it's why do I want that in my life? You're my partner, so you're a function of something in me. So if I'm asking you to stuff down your bliss, that means a part of me is stuffing down my bliss too. So it's it just doesn't make sense all around. You know what I mean? And on top of that, I bet you $20 your dreams are firing up right now too. So we don't have the time to do dreams here, but if you're in LGA, you can post there, and then we can take a closer look. Okay, and thank you for that, and I hope that was helpful. This next question about grief and suffering / pain, and how knowing it is universal changes the experience. So this person says, hey, Artie, at the minute I'm mulling over two thoughts that are not quite congruent in my head. A, going into and through your individual suffering allows progress of a kind, like the butterfly, caterpillar, right? And B, everybody suffers to some degree from the same kinds of issues, but also it might ease, the pain. Let me see here. Oh, so will the universality of knowing that everyone suffers make my pain less when I'm going through my personal suffering is basically the question. Okay. And so the way I think about this is, yes, to me, the universality does take the edge off your own suffering, but in a very specific way. When I point out the universality, like when you have wounds, it's like everyone has wounds. They all have a different, unique fingerprint of a wound. So it feels different from a wound. It doesn't feel like you're going through the same thing, and you're not. But even though everyone's fingerprint is unique, we all do have a fingerprint, right? And in that collective experience, we can all be like, okay, and feel better. And so for me, the universality of this and suffering, the key thing that does is that it takes away the shame of having a wound, of having a fingerprint in the first place. We all have grief. We all have suffering. We all have doubt. We all grope forward. We all, plunge back into the profane and act out of fear, threat, and control, and not love, nurturing, and surrender. And it's okay. That's life, right? That it happens. There's sacred and there's profane. There's not like you must be in the sacred all the time. It's like, no, I go into the profane. Like if I go out to the grocery store and I'm buying stuff, like I don't expect them to give me the stuff for free, and I don't expect them to like, if they overcharge me, I'll like fight them too, right? It's like the profane. So nothing wrong with the profane. And so it is just comfort in knowing the acknowledgement that this is universal. So the thing you are relieved of is the shame of having a wound. Right, so I can have a broken arm and be like, oh my gosh, I can't let anyone see my broken, right? And that is what a wound, like, for instance, sexual abuse might be. I mean, any of these sort of traumas or abuses, you think, oh my gosh, this is shameful. Even though like you didn't choose to have the wound, it was done to you. You were like 4 years old, you had no control, but you still grow up with the shame because you're like, I'm the only, dumb bunny who like fell for this, and I didn't protect myself and everybody else did. So everyone hides in shame, and no one can come forward to like support each other in sacred space with the universality of it's like the Me Too movement. Once everyone started coming out, it became more normalized, and the entire army then like, sort of pointed forward and charged, right? And all these things started like cracking beautifully. And so this recognition is what the universality gives. Now, when you're in your own individual caterpillar or cocoon, I don't observe that it reduces the pain of that. Right? That's still going to be painful and scary as hell. But we have the pain of that, and then we have the pain and fear and threat and control of the shame that's on top of that, which often is in some ways worse. I mean, when you have like a trauma victim and you remove the shame, they're like, oh, so I'm not, and there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not defective. I'm this. It goes back to being a broken arm again. It's like, oh yeah, I was skiing, I broke my arm, and everyone's like, oh, let me sign your cast. There's no shame in having a broken arm, but there is shame of other emotional wounds, right? So you know what it feels like to have an emotional wound without shame when you think about a broken arm that you broke sort of skiing or skateboarding or a car accident that wasn't your fault. Nobody shames you for it. It's like a thing. It still hurts like bloody hell, but you don't have the shame on top of it. So you're like, it itches, and people are bringing me ice cream. People are buying my groceries. Great. Almost enjoy it, right? And it's okay. The wound itself, like, after the shame lifts, the wound itself, most people are like, is nothing. I mean, it's over now. I like, the guys in jail, all this other stuff. It was the fear of further shaming that was the worst thing. So the proportion is different. Some things the wound itself is like 90%, and in other cases the wound is like less than 90, and the shame is like 80% of it. So it's different with everyone, but those are generally how the physics are. And once you remove the shame, which is, by the way, one of the things that happens when you step into sacred space, right? The fear, threat, and control of like, oh, the blame of like, oh, this thing was actually your fault and you were stupid and blah, blah, blah. That's all lifted. So you relax, and then we can actually like, relax and take a look at the actual wound and say, oh, well, we just do this and that. And many times when you finally turn over, because the fear and shame and all of the profane is lifted in sacred space. That's why hospitals are sacred spaces. You go in and you feel like sometimes you walked into a church in a certain kind of hospital. And hospitum, like the Latin word, has that connotation. It is a sacred obligation when hosts took you under their hospital, right? To the point where if you were sick, they had to take care of you. And if you were killed, they had to avenge you as your kinsperson, right? That was how sacred and binding the rules of hospitum in the ancient world were. Anyway, so when it's a thing and there's no shame, most people are like, oh, what a relief. All right, let's roll. Let's get this thing fixed, and then I can go back out there and continue following my golden thread. Okay, those were my thoughts, and thank you for sharing the question. Okay, here we have 3 questions about bliss and sacred space. So the first is, how intertwined are sacred space and living in your bliss? Sacred space and living in your bliss. Are they one and the same? I found when asking myself when I'm in my sacred space, it overlapped hugely with when I'm actually doing things that bring me into bliss. So this person, when they did the exercise of like, when am I already in the sacred, she found that it overlapped very much one-to-one with when I'm doing my bliss, I'm in the sacred. So the answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, technically, are they exactly one and the same? I think the way I would characterize it is, within sacred space, the golden thread appears or is more obvious. It's always everywhere. And when you follow it, you're following your bliss. And all of the feelings that come with following your bliss, your golden thread in sacred space, it's just almost indescribable. It's so fantastic, is what ensues. So the notes out here, bliss, when you follow your bliss, even when you follow the golden thread through the world of the profane, as you are doing it, you sacralize your world. As you follow your bliss, you are creating the sacred as you go. Right? Like someone wearing too heavy perfume or cologne, they walk through the room. Even after they're gone, they were there. but the good version of it, right? They walk through the room and you feel the sacred, like it's like a Jedi walk through the room and you're like, whoa, what was that? You don't even see them, you felt them. Okay. So when you pursue your bliss, you end up sacralizing your world. Everything is done to support the manifestation of the blueprint, the golden thread of the sacred within you, through you. That's why you're unstoppable. It's not just you. It's like you're in a river and the river's flowing forward at 100 miles an hour, and you see me coming. And it's like, I'm relaxed. I'm not even paddling. I'm going 100 miles an hour because I'm following the golden thread, the river of the flow of my bliss. So, so if you're in my way, you need to get out of my way. But also the reason is not because I'm so powerful, but because I'm in the flow of my bliss. So if you want to stop me, you also have to stop the moving, sort of wall, tsunami, the moving mountain of water, of 30 million cubic meters of water that are behind me, carrying me and pushing me forward. I look like I'm just floating, but I'm coming down as like a little buoy marker of the force of this bliss flow. So if you get hit by me, you'll probably get carried along by me, which, hopefully is a good thing. Hopefully it's a good thing. So the second question about bliss and sacred space, when being in the sacred space is the ultimate goal, when being in the sacred space is the ultimate goal to be in it and be conscious, seeing most of us are in and out of it without even being aware of it. Put another way, do we want to try and be fully conscious when we are in sacred space to get the maximum benefit? And so, yes and no. So the consciousness is just to like being aware of staying in the flow of it. It's kind of like you want to know what it feels like to be in the flow of the river. And then you forget you're in the river. But the minute you start hitting the bank and you like stop flowing, you notice immediately. And then you're like, okay, and you push off and you paddle back into the middle of the flow. Right. So it's definitely helpful to be conscious where you know what it feels like. Right. So that when you lose it, you like immediately are like, well, what? And then you take measures to fix it. Not and the quicker you detect it, the less you need to do to sort of paddle your way back, right? So it's kind of like driving, right? You've been driving for like 15 years. It's like all muscle memory. The car's practically driving itself, and you stay in the lane just fine. No undue effort needed. You're talking on the phone, hopefully not texting, But when you do start to drift, you start to feel the divots in the road, the rumble strips, and you're like, oh, and then you take very little effort just to go back in the lane, right? So being conscious in the flow of the bliss is ideally like that. Because you don't want to be too controlling of like, I need to absolutely, because when you're too tight, the river's not flowing through you. It's just like pushing you from the outside. That's a dumb analogy, but hopefully you get the feeling. But the key is to get the flavor of the taste of being in the flow. Like this is what we do when we do the bliss program. We're like coming at it from all these different angles. So you taste all these different wines, right, that have like a blackberry flavor note in them, but like different everything else. So that after tasting these 6 wines, through triangulation exactly what that blackberry note is that everyone talks about. And then now you know. And then you get into it, and then you just let go and you flow. But the minute that blackberry note leaves, you're like, okay, wait, this new job, I'm like considering something tastes different about this. It's not blissful. And then you'll alert, and then you'll get back in the flow. Okay. And third question, does being in the sacred space mean that is when you are ultimately coming in touch with your true self without the masks on? So yes. Yes. I mean, we've talked about this, even after death, potentially, right? It's not an instant all masks off. There are degrees. And gosh, there's all this stuff I can say here. So it's however many masks you want to take off or not. I'll put it that way. To your taste and your preference and your whim. Okay. Your mood and your whim matters hugely for your bliss, because what you just like randomly feel like doing, that is a signal of the golden thread as well. Often, but not always. Sometimes it's like you're soothing, you just want to take drugs, you feel like taking drugs because you're like in pain and you want to numb it. But that's why you sort of practice and study bliss, because you want to get the flavor of that blackberry note. So when you're like, oh, I feel like drinking wine, even without blackberry, I don't care, I just want to drink wine because I want to just get drunk and numb. You realize the wine you're about to drink doesn't have blackberry note, and you're like, you know what? My whim of doing this is not blissful, so I'm not going to do it. But once you've isolated that and you know when it's the golden thread of your bliss, your whim matters a lot, because your whim is like the moment by moment kind of compass reading of how to go and even make the most out of like a single day, right? Because and I was going to talk about the what versus the how, but I don't want to talk about all that sort of stuff right now. It's too much to get into right now. But in sacred space, I will say, you are safe to remove whatever masks you want or don't want. Um, it's a fertile space of creativity. It flows through you. And at the end of the day, when you fully surrender, um, stuff will just start to happen. Like the golden thread will start driving the bus of your life. And then all this stuff will start to happen. People call it like good luck or manifestation or the universe conspiring to help you. It's not this judgment of like, oh, she's good enough now, so now we're going to help her. It's like, no, no, no. It's like once you fully hand over the car keys, metaphorically speaking, to the golden thread's like, are you sure? And you're like, yeah. And then that previous question is if I drive, you're not going to be with your partner for very much longer. And you're like, I'm just going to give you the keys without being attached to any, final outcome. And just, I know this is the right thing. I'm just going to give you the keys. You drive and just let the chips fall where they may. And you may end up still with your partner. We don't know, right? But once that part of you, the golden thread, is driving, it can call on the radio, hey, open that road. I mean, it has liaison to like all these other sort of levers of power in life, if you will. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, you're doing all that for me. It's like, yeah, Jonah, okay, whatever. Now your next gig, we're going to be in like Bethlehem, and I need you to say these things to these people, right? It's, in other words, it's not for you. I mean, you get incredible life of pleasure as a reward, but it is for the golden thread. The golden thread will do whatever it needs to do, which leads to all kinds of other issues we talk about in bliss, where it's like, one of the catches is that you don't get to choose your bliss. So if it's a bliss that other people don't understand or will shame you for, you need to decide what you're going to do about that in this lifetime. Right. Okay. Thank you for that question. Okay, let's do one more question. So here we have, how is my time in sacred space going? Let me just continue from here next session. Okay, I'm going to mark this for myself. I'll just skim through this question. The last 2 Sundays, you asked us to respond back, to entertain, excite your nerdy self, and to share insights and experiences we were having during this time of sheltering in place. Social isolation, social spacing, quarantining, going within. As a single woman, I'm just reading this, I am truly alone here in my wee studio here on the coast. My 3 children are raised. I can relax and enjoy this time as a respite from my work. Oh, goody, I dig this. It's my favorite exploration. It's my jam. Let's go. However, even with all the available Zoom classes, possible lectures, and spiritual sharings, clearings, and connections, began to become an internal pressure to step up, to maintain a place of constant presence and prayer, right? Especially for those individuals suffering and struggling at this time. I started feeling weary and exhausted and irritated at the least bit of shallowness on the presenter's part. My inner judge and critic rose up in full regalia. Don't be like that. Don't say that. Oh, I had a lot of voices talking. So I decided I didn't need more input. I needed less. I was on overload. I stopped reaching out to others. I returned to my alone practices, my solitude practices, meditation, Tai Chi, puzzle making. Having previously taken your 7-day course and your 0-minute meditation, these ideas and practices are currently in my repertoire of tools. Good job. Throughout the day, my walks in nature, I often find myself focusing solely on the sounds around me. Nice. I found that to be extremely grounding and calming for me. I also reach out to befriend my monkey mind and ask her to sit beside me or give her free rein, right? Because thoroughbreds want to run. The exposure to music and especially chanting, wow, nice, encourages my mind to be often singing or chanting in the background of my waking hours even. This quiets my monkey mind. I often have to stop and ask myself, who's singing, right? What is that chant going around in the expanse of my mind? I've begun recording my dreams before rising again. I'd stopped for the last few years, and I'm reminded of this. The golden thread has offered up poems and visions that might otherwise have gotten lost to a busy morning mind. So these are the rambling responses of a coastal woman during the COVID-19 days of traumatic transcendent transformation. Blessings to your nerd within and to the complex, intelligent environment. Joyous healer that you are. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so my quick comments on this, and then we'll end. So yes, absolutely, less is okay. That makes perfect sense. And this thing of like you letting your monkey mind run and chanting and letting that reverberate and continue, elongate into your day. My only comment here was that this is just a beautiful example, an amazing example of, and if you want to read this, I think you just go to last week's session, it's there. An amazing example of when you are doing nothing from the view of the profane, okay, it doesn't mean that nothing is happening, right? Stuff is flowing through you like a river, whether you are paddling or not. And for my money, I'm like, you're like, I've returned to my singular practices, meditation, Tai Chi, puzzle making. I'm like, you don't even have, I mean, you do whatever you like, right? On your whim, which matters, but you don't even have to meditate. You don't have to do healing. You don't have to do anything, right? You don't even have to do this sacred space thing, right? You can just sit and, eat chocolate and stare out the window, right? It doesn't mean nothing's happening. Stuff is continuing to flow through you. The golden thread is coming by. And you say, the golden thread has offered up poems and visions that might otherwise had gotten lost if I hadn't been doing these practices. And I say, first of all, that's lovely and beautiful, but, so what? So what if they got lost, right? What this means is you realize the golden thread has been giving these to you every morning, even when you don't listen. And they've been spilling on the floor, lost. I know you're like, oh my gosh, now I have to fear, threat, and control myself into doing morning practices every morning. I'm like, no, the golden thread will continue to be there for you because it is you, even after you die. So even if you're like the dumb bunny who like never follows their bliss in this lifetime, that's okay, right? You don't get off that easily. Don't think, as my mom used to say, don't even think, don't think you get off that easily. I'm like, oh, geez, okay. So with bliss, don't think you get off that easily, okay? So, which also means you don't have to worry. Which also means if you have a gorgeous dream that explains everything and you wake up and you just have to go to the bathroom, so you go, and halfway to the bathroom, it all evaporates. I mean, it is annoying, right? But at the same time, don't worry, it'll come back again eventually. Right? They'll keep sending the email till you get it. Don't be afraid. There is no fear and threat with the golden thread. You are the golden thread. I mean, another word I can use is abundance. It's not really abundance. It's actually further than that. It's inexhaustibility. Right? The golden thread is like inexhaustible. So if it sends you a Pulitzer Prize winning, or not Pulitzer, but whatever award winning poem, and you lose it, you'll get another one. Another one. I mean, even the next poem won't be the poem you lost. I know that, but just relax. It's inexhaustible. Let the storehouse of plenty continue flowing. The minute you're like, gosh darn it, I need to really sort of get my life in order, you like tighten up, snap the golden thread, and the flow actually stops. Okay. So to really do nothing, to let the reins down and let the horse go its own way. In the Fisher King, that is a major motif of like letting the reins down and let the horse go its way. It is hard. There's constantly the voices of fear, threat, and control saying, no, the horse doesn't know where it's supposed to go. You got to constantly whip it and keep tight hold on the reins. And that's just not true. Right? The horse is not stupid. The horse has a brain and a soul and a heart too. And so it's really hard to teach um, this idea of like just letting the horse reins go, just jumping in the river and letting it take you. I don't even put it into any program, because when I start to talk about it, people who have done a lot of therapy and they're like, oh yeah, I know that. I learned that already. It's just blank. It's just this and that. And then they like tighten up and snap the thread, right? In reality, there isn't a name for it, right? You can't name the thing that is the flow of everything. Because, when you name something, then it implies there has to be a second thing. If I say this is a pencil, I can only say this is a pencil if I define everything else as not pencil, or most other things as not pencil. So if I say the flow of everything, I can't really say that, because there's nothing actually outside that pencil, because the flow of everything is everything. So it is nameless, right? Like, hint, hint, God is nameless. Okay. So it's typically really hard to talk about, so I just don't. But what you've described is a pretty good description of what it feels like when you're doing nothing and you discover that nothing is still happening, right? So I just wanted to point that out and just say thank you. It's beautiful. All right. So we've got about 5 minutes left to the 2-hour mark. So the next, if there's a lot more questions for the next session, I think the next session will just dispense with the special topic, and we'll just go through the questions so we can catch up. Okay. All right. So the last thing I want to do before we close is just suggest a sacred space exercise for us to try, only if you want, over the next week before next Sunday session. And the exercise I'll suggest for this week to apropos of everything we've talked about when we talked about golden thread and honoring the dead, the exercise this week is to get a closer feel for the golden thread, right? So it is something you feel only within the sacred and not in the profane. And once you're in the profane, it breaks like that, because it's like this gossamer thin, hand-hammered golden thread. Very delicate, okay? So when Bill Stafford describes it, he's like, even a shrug will break it. Even a shrug will break it, okay? It's like, oh yeah, that's just whatever, I know that. The intellect comes in, stamps all over the golden thread, and like even the gold dust is gone. Okay. And so we know that it breaks very easily. And we also know that the bubble wrap around that is sacred space, right? All right, see where I'm going here? And in the past few sessions, we have been building up our muscles, our skills on being in sacred space, just even in the middle of the day, like carving out sacred space, right? And then realizing when we're out profane, we like automatically slip into sacred space automatically, just for no reason, accidentally. And then I think last week the exercise was, even when you're out in the profane, can you maintain sacred space? Can you maintain sacred space even when you're on a Zoom call in a business meeting, right? And for those of you who have done 0 minute meditation, it's exactly the same physics of what we talk about there. Okay. So now this week, let's like take it one more step forward and say, if you can try to maintain the feeling of continuing to follow the golden thread, even when you're in the midst of profane space. And the physics of it, as we know, will require that you're in the profane, that you're holding sacred space within yourself, or perhaps behind the mask and unbeknownst to anyone else. And you're holding the sacred space so naturally and persistently that even in the midst of the profane, even on the highway, someone cutting you off, well, I mean, none of us are really driving, but you know what I mean. Someone makes a comment or whatever. you're able to maintain the sacred so consistently, persistently, that your golden thread reappears and you're able to follow it. Not right when you get up in the morning, but even in the middle of the day. So this is not a have to do. It's just a let's try it. And if we fall over, like we'll all fall over, right? It's like let's try surfing this wave, and we all like wipe out, and we're like, haha, we're like clapping and giggling the whole time. That kind of a let's just try it. And then if you can catch this golden thread even in the profane, to see how far you can follow it. Let it guide your actions. See if you can let it guide your life feeling and life direction, even when you are in the profane. So in other words, this feeling of no discontinuity of the golden thread as it goes from sacred to profane and back again. Is it possible? Is it possible? I don't know. We do know, though, that the golden thread is everywhere. And in some ways, you could say the golden thread is, in a way, everything. But we know that the golden thread is out there in the profane as well. So the question is, can we open our sacred space bubble or lens so that even in the profane, we can look down into the water and see it and then take hold of it? Now that said, I don't know what it means to you when you hold and follow the golden thread. That's private to each person, which is what makes this exercise so interesting and powerful. The feeling will be similar, but how it actually directs your actions will be completely different from person to person. So because you have the feeling in your own firsthand experience of the golden thread and you know what it means for you, just keep hold of it, follow it through the world of the profane as much as you can, and then just see where it leads and see how your life feels different. Does it feel different? Where it leads you to act in ways which you wouldn't have acted before, or how it leads you to make decisions in ways you wouldn't have made them in before. And if you do choose to do this, I'd be very interested in your experiences, and just email me back and just give me an update. Okay, well, that's the exercise. So give that a try if you want to. Okay. All right. So we're at 12:05. So I'll go ahead and close the session now. So our next session is always on Sunday. You have the green button there if you want to sign up for it right now. It's open to you now. It's free, open to the public. Please invite others. I love having more people come in. And then if you have more questions, please post them to that session as well, and I'll use them to guide my comments in that session. All right. So now I'll close the session. So I hereby close this session of our sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with me. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you.